My father married a woman who hated me. She pushed away my brother and tried to send me away. But when I left home, the truth came out, and she was left exposed. I'm 17 years old. I'm a senior in high school. And I need to tell this story because basically my life went to shit about a year ago when my dad decided to marry the wrong person. I guess I should start at the beginning. When my mom died. I was 10. She had cancer. And honestly, I don't remember much from that time beyond feeling completely lost. You know, like my entire world had collapsed. My dad was devastated. My brother Kyle was 15 back then, and he basically became my second father figure because dad was so buried in his grief that he could barely function. Kyle helped me with homework, drove me to school, made sure I ate. All those things a 5-year-old shouldn't have to do, but he did anyway, because we didn't have another option. The years after Mom died were hard, but also, I don't know, there was something comforting about the way Kyle, Dad, and I became this tight unit, like the three of us leaning on each other to keep going. Dad eventually came out of his depression, functional again, and by the time I was like 13 or 14, things felt stable again. Kyle had moved into his own apartment when he turned 20, but he lived like 15 minutes away and came over all the time. I mean, we had dinner together at least 3 times a week, watched movies on weekends. He helped me with my college applications, even though I was still years away from that. He was my favorite person in the world, basically my best friend, in addition to being my brother. And then Dad met Jennifer. This was like 2 years ago. I was 15. She worked at his law firm. She's 40 years old, so like 5 years younger than Dad. And from the beginning, something about her gave me bad vibes. I can't explain it exactly, but there was something about the way she looked at me, like she was evaluating me and finding me lacking, you know what I mean? But Dad was happy for the first time in years, like really happy, smiling all the time and texting her like a lovesick teenager, and Kyle told me we should give her a chance because Dad deserved to be happy again. So I tried. I really did try. They got engaged after 6 months of dating. 6 months. My mom and Dad had been together since college, like 20 years, and this guy gets engaged to someone he barely knows. I should have seen that as a red flag, but at the time I just thought, well, he's an adult. I guess he knows what he's doing. The wedding was small, just close family. And that's when I met Molly, Jennifer's daughter. She's 16, a year younger than me, and honestly, she's the only good part of this whole situation because at least she tries to be nice and keep the peace, even though her mom is a total mess. Things started changing immediately after they got married and Jennifer moved in. Suddenly, there were all these new rules in the house. Things that had never been a problem before became these big dramas. Jennifer had opinions about everything, from how I should dress to how much time I spent with Kyle, and Dad just, sided with her on everything. It was like he'd forgotten that Kyle and I were his kids first, before she came along with her ideas about how we should live our lives. Kyle noticed the change too. He still came over for dinner. But Jennifer would make these passive-aggressive comments about how some adults need to learn to let their little brothers grow up, or it's interesting how some people don't have anything better to do than hang out with teenagers. Kyle tried to ignore her, and I could see Dad felt uncomfortable when she said these things, but he never corrected her, never told her to shut up, or that Kyle was welcome in our house always. He just sat there silently eating his food, while Jennifer basically insulted my brother to his face. But the moment when everything really exploded was on Labor Day last year. Dad decided to have a barbecue, invite some colleagues from his firm, and the neighbors, one of those typical suburban things where everyone pretends to be best friends for a few hours. Kyle came, obviously, and it was hot, so after eating, he and I got in the pool. We were playing around, like throwing the ball back and forth and having competitions about who could hold their breath longer underwater, totally normal stuff we'd done a million times before. Jennifer was inside with some of the guests, but she could see us from the kitchen window. Suddenly, she comes storming out, still wearing her apron, and starts yelling at us in front of everyone. That we were being immature, that we were disturbing the guests with our noise. We weren't being that loud, honestly. That Kyle should know better how to behave, considering he's a two-year-old adult, and that I was being disrespectful by ignoring the guests. The whole party went silent. Like total awkward silence where everyone looks at their plates and pretends they didn't hear anything. I got out of the pool feeling completely humiliated, with all these people staring at me like I was some problem child. And Kyle got out too, but didn't say anything because he didn't want to make things worse. I waited for Dad to say something, to tell Jennifer she was going too far, that Kyle and I were just having fun, but he didn't. He just muttered something about, "Let's keep the volume down, guys," and went back to his conversation like nothing had happened. Kyle left about an hour later, and I could see on his face that he was hurt, but trying not to show it. That night, Jennifer told me I owed her an apology for ruining her party, and I told her I wasn't going to apologize for playing in the pool in my own house. She turned red, like red, and went to complain to Dad. Dad came to my room and gave me this speech about respecting Jennifer, about how she's part of the family now, and I need to accept her rules. I said, "What rule did I break exactly? The rule about not having fun? The rule about not spending time with my brother?" And he got frustrated and said I was being difficult on purpose, that I just needed to apologize so we could all move on. I refused. We yelled at each other some more, and then he left, slamming the door. We didn't talk properly for days after that. But what Jennifer did next was worse. Kyle told me like a week later that she had sent him a text message, a long, detailed message about how he was the problem, how he was interfering with the new family dynamic, how I needed to find my place in the blended family, but couldn't do it while Kyle kept encouraging my immature behavior. She told him it would be better for everyone if he took some distance for a while, like several months, to let things settle down. Kyle was furious. Not so much for himself, but for me, because he knew Jennifer was basically trying to cut me off from my most important support system. Kyle forwarded the message to Dad and asked him if this was really what he wanted. Dad called Kyle. They talked for hours, according to what he told me later, and apparently Dad told him that Jennifer was concerned about my development and thought I depended too much on Kyle, that I needed to form bonds with my new family. Kyle asked him, "What about the bonds I already have with you and Seth?" Dad didn't have a good answer for that. At the end of that conversation, Kyle decided to take a bit of distance. Not because Jennifer asked him to, but because he didn't want to cause me more problems. He stopped coming to dinner, stopped coming over on weekends, and even though he still texted me every day and called me, it wasn't the same. Jennifer saw this as a victory, I guess, because after Kyle distanced himself, she started implementing even more rules. Suddenly, I had a 9 p.m. curfew on school nights. I'm 17, almost 18, and I'd never had a curfew before. She wanted to check my phone every night to make sure I wasn't involved in anything inappropriate. She made a chore list that was basically double what Molly had to do. Every time I questioned something, she told me I was being disrespectful, and Dad backed every decision she made without even asking for my side. I tried to hold on, I really did, because I only had one more year before going to college and I thought I could survive. But then I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. It was late at night, like 11, and I went downstairs for water. Jennifer and Dad were in the living room talking, and I heard Jennifer say that maybe it would be better if I went to live with my grandparents for my last year of high school, that I clearly had adjustment issues, and that a more structured environment with them might be better for me. My grandparents live in another state, like 8 hours away, and while I love them, I don't know them that well because I only see them at Christmas and maybe in summer. I waited to hear what Dad said. There was a long silence, and then he said, "I don't know, Jennifer. That seems extreme," she responded. "It's just a suggestion, but think about how much more peaceful our house would be, how much easier it would be for Molly to adjust without all this constant tension." And Dad didn't say no. He didn't say, "That's a terrible idea. Seth is my son, and this is his home." He just said, "I'll think about it." Like sending your kid away was a business decision you need to consider. I went back to my room, didn't sleep that night, and the next morning after everyone left, I started packing my stuff. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, my laptop, some books, pictures of Mom. I called Kyle from school and told him I needed to leave, that I couldn't stay in that house one more day. He asked me what happened, and I told him everything, and I could hear in his voice that he was angry, like really angry, but also worried about me. He told me I could stay with him as long as I needed, that he had space, that we'd figure it out. That afternoon I went home, finished packing while Dad and Jennifer were still at work, left Dad a note that basically said, "I'm going to live with Kyle. I can't stay here anymore. Don't look for me until you're ready to choose me for once." And I left. Molly came home just as I was loading the last box into my car, a 2015 Honda Civic that had been Mom's and that Dad gave me when I turned 16. And she had tears in her eyes and asked me if I was really leaving. I told her yes, that I was sorry, but I couldn't take it anymore. She hugged me and told me she understood, that she'd seen how her mom treated me and wished she could do something about it. Kyle's apartment is small, like a one-bedroom apartment, but he has a sofa bed in the living room that became my bed. That first night, Dad called like 15 times, sent me dozens of messages, all saying things like, "Please come home, we can talk about this. I'm sorry if things have been hard." But what he wasn't saying was, "I made a mistake. I should have defended you. Jennifer was wrong." So I didn't respond. Kyle let me stay without asking questions. He gave me space when I needed it and talked to me when I wanted to talk. I kept going to school, did my homework, tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. Dad eventually stopped calling every day but still texted me regularly, asking how I was, saying he missed me. He never mentioned Jennifer or whether she'd asked about me. About 3 weeks went by like that. Kyle had to talk to Dad several times because technically Dad is still my legal guardian, and Kyle wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any legal issues with me living with him. Dad apparently told Kyle it was fine, that he just wanted to know I was safe and hoped I'd eventually be ready to come home. But he never addressed the real issues, never acknowledged his part in all of this. And then one night, like a month after I moved out, Dad asked me to meet him at the park near our house, the same park where Mom used to take us when we were little, where Kyle taught me to ride a bike. I went because, I don't know, I guess part of me still wanted to believe we could fix this. I found him sitting on one of the benches. He looked tired and older than I remembered, and when he saw me, he stood up but didn't try to hug me. Just stood there awkwardly. We sat down and he started talking. He told me he'd been thinking a lot, that he knew he'd made mistakes, that he should have been better at balancing his new relationship with his responsibilities as a father. He used a lot of general words, without really admitting anything specific, and I could feel my frustration growing. I interrupted him and said, "Do you know Jennifer wanted to send me to live with Grandma and Grandpa?" He went quiet, and that told me everything I needed to know. He knew. He'd actually considered getting rid of me to make his life easier. I asked him, "Do you love her more than you love me?" And he looked shocked. Said no, of course not, that he'd never stop loving me. But I told him, "Then why did you act like you did? Why did you let her treat me like that? Why didn't you ever defend me?" And he didn't have answers. Just kept saying, "I'm sorry," over and over like that was enough. I told him I needed time, that I wasn't ready to come back, that maybe I'd never be ready unless things really changed. He nodded, said he understood, that he'd give me space, but that I'd always be welcome home. I left that conversation feeling empty, like not even angry anymore, just exhausted from everything. 2 weeks after that conversation, Molly called me crying. At first, I couldn't understand what she was saying, but eventually she managed to tell me that Jennifer was leaving, that she and Dad had a huge fight about boundaries and respect, and that Jennifer had packed her things and Molly's, and they were going to stay with Jennifer's sister for a while. Molly was devastated because she didn't want to leave. She liked her school, had friends, and felt like her mom was being dramatic. But she was 16, had no choice but to go with her mom. I didn't know what to feel when Molly told me that. Part of me was relieved that Jennifer was leaving, but another part felt guilty, like somehow I'd caused this family to fall apart. Kyle told me it wasn't my fault, that Jennifer and Dad clearly had issues that had nothing to do with me, but I still felt responsible. Dad called me that night. He sounded devastated, told me Jennifer had left, that she'd said things about how he prioritized his kids over her, about how she could never be part of the family if Kyle and I didn't respect her. Dad had tried to explain to her that it wasn't about lack of respect, but about boundaries, that she'd gone too far with the rules and control. But Jennifer saw it as him choosing me over her. And I guess that's exactly what it was, even though it took him way too long to get there. He asked me if I'd consider coming over for dinner sometime, that he wanted to spend time with me without all the tension of Jennifer being there. I told him I'd think about it. Few days later, Molly called me again, told me Dad was really bad, that he wasn't eating well and spent most of his time in his home office working or just sitting in the dark. She was worried about him, but didn't know what to do from far away. So I went to visit him. The house felt strangely empty without Jennifer and Molly there, and Dad looked even worse in person than he'd sounded on the phone. We sat in the living room, the same living room where I'd overheard Jennifer suggest sending me away. And Dad, finally, really apologized to me. Not with generic apologies, but with specific acknowledgement of what he'd done wrong. He told me he'd been so scared of being alone again after losing Mom that when he met Jennifer, he latched on too quickly, that he let his fear of loneliness cloud his judgment as a father. He admitted he'd ignored red flags because he didn't want to see that his new relationship was damaging his relationship with his kids. He cried. Never cries, not since Mom's funeral. He told me he'd understand if I couldn't forgive him yet, that he'd broken my trust and it would take time to rebuild it, but that he wanted to try if I was willing. I told him I wanted to try too, but that I needed to see real changes, not just words. He agreed. Now I'm back home most of the time. Though technically I still have my stuff at Kyle's apartment just in case. Dad and Jennifer are still separated. I think they're in the process of getting divorced, though I don't know the exact details. Molly and I text regularly. She's okay but misses her old school. Kyle comes over for dinner again. And Dad has been very clear that Kyle is always welcome, that he's family no matter what. Things aren't perfect. Dad and I are still learning to trust each other again, and there are awkward moments where neither of us knows exactly what to say. But it's better. Definitely better than a few months ago. Last week, Dad asked me if I wanted to help him cook dinner, something we used to do all the time before Jennifer came along. We made pasta from scratch, laughed when the dough got stuck everywhere, and for a moment it felt like before, like when it was just the three of us trying to move forward after Mom. And that's enough for now, I guess.